Tarita is a warrior for MS and believes that travel should be inclusive, not exclusive. Her company, Travel for All, ensures that regardless of your mobility or ability, you will have the travel experience of a lifetime. Now, let's talk travel. Here's Tarita.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for tuning in to Travel for All. We're happy that you can join us to talk about the best part of life and one of the great things in life, which is traveling. Today, I'm really quite happy to have my guest, who is an avid traveler, and he is such a great advocate for accessibility and for inclusion, and he is always on the go. I signed up for his email newsletter so that I can find out exactly where he is in the world. It's kind of neat. So welcome, John. We're so happy to have you with us. John is the founder of wheelchairtravel.org. He holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in history from Florida State University. And so welcome, John. We're happy that you could join us.
Thank you, Tarita. I'm honored to be here and excited to talk about travel.
We are really quite happy to have you with us because you are a wealth of knowledge about traveling with a disability. And that is something that is passionate for me, is for everyone to realize that they can do whatever they want to do. The world can still be their oyster. And you exemplify that. And I applaud all of the wonderful work that you do with sharing your stories of when you traveled, what you encountered, all of that kind of good stuff. So tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about your history. So where were you born and all the kind of good stuff?
Well, I was born in Pennsylvania in the United States, not too far away from the beautiful battlefields of Gettysburg.
Oh, neat.
Yes, it's a beautiful place. I went to high school in Florida, in Central Florida, and also went to university in Florida at Florida State. And I guess the history of my disability is that it's somewhat recent. I had a car accident at the end of 2012. The car caught fire, and most of my injuries were relating to the fire. I became a triple amputee and am now a full-time wheelchair user.
Yes, it's. I've read the story, and it's not been that long ago, and I am so. It's so wonderful to hear that somebody else that, something happens to you in life, you get thrown this really ugly, nasty curveball. And that's at that moment where you have two choices. You can either decide to continue to live and choose to find something that, fills your passions, or you can feel sorry for yourself. And unfortunately, it's, a lot of people that choose to just give up for a while. And I pray and I hope that they end up coming back to doing what it is that they love. So were you a travel, did you have the travel bug bite before the accident?
I absolutely did. When I was at university, I would fly away on the weekends to places all around the world, and I was a very avid traveler, always trying to collect airline miles for future trips. And yes, I've always had a very strong passion for exploring the world.
Yes, it's something that once you're bitten, that's it. You're done for. You're going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time traveling. So when the accident, do you mind what happened? How did the accident occur? Like what happened? Was it mechanical error? What happened?
Well, we're not entirely sure. I was driving in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was on the phone with my mom complaining of some chest pains. And next thing that happened was the call dropped because of the accident. So
Right.
We're not entirely sure, what, physically caused me to pass out while I was talking to my mother. but as far as right now, I'm a clean bill of health outside of missing a few parts of my body. But I'm very grateful to be alive and able to travel.
That's fantastic. How scary for your mom, though. But you know what? Obviously, she raised a trooper who is a fighter. So that's fantastic. So when you, after the accident and you decided to do some traveling, what were your thoughts? How did you think about, how am I going to do this? Did you find that there were a lot of resources out there for you? How did you start to plan?
Well, my first trip came about a little over a year after my accident. There were a lot of surgeries and healthcare things that I had to deal with before I was fit to go back out into the world. And the purpose for my first trip was my university had made it into the college football national championship game.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I really wanted to make it out to Los Angeles to see that game. And I began, trying to figure out how to do it. And there was very little information available to me on the internet to describe exactly how you travel with a disability if you can't walk or stand, and particularly if you're traveling with a very large power wheelchair. And so these were questions, that were difficult to answer. I made a lot of calls and spoke to airlines and hotels in planning that first trip. It was very interesting. Power wheelchairs, for instance, are significantly tall, and some aircraft have, a limited or a small cargo hold door, and so in order for that wheelchair to get into a plane, I had to fly on larger aircraft. So yes. I had to, spend a significant amount of time plotting out flight itinerary that could get me there on the type of aircraft that I needed.
Yes, that's very true. You can't do the sort of the hoppers, the jumps where the tiny little planes is not going to work. And so did you find that it was receptive when you made the phone calls to the airlines and to the hotels? Did you find that they were fairly receptive and willing to help?
Well, I certainly didn't encounter anyone in those early days who treated me poorly or with any disrespect. I think the challenge was finding people who could understand what my needs were and how to address them, and that was very difficult. There are not a large number of people, in my circumstance, who are traveling, and so for a lot of airline employees, it might not have been an issue that they would have had to deal with previously.
Right, and when you say that there's not a lot of people with your type of disability, etc., that are traveling, it's actually, and it makes me exceptionally happy to learn about this particular demographic, that we are traveling, and it's we need to be accommodated. So, and I think somebody like you who's getting up there to show that hey, I'm still here, we're not going anywhere. So accommodate me. So what was after you decided to go, so your first trip was to go and watch your football alma mater play, and did they win?
They did win. Florida State became the national champion, so I was very excited by that. We had a fairly unimpressive football team during my time at university, but I got to experience a fun time at the game as a graduate.
So the first trip out there, what did you encounter? Like, what were the obstacles that you did actually encounter on that first trip to LA? And it was you were flying, and then you had a hotel, and what did you encounter?
Well, I suppose in general, the trip was fairly positive, a positive experience in terms of accessibility, but we had done a great deal of preparation and planning for that trip, and my greatest concern on arrival was ground transportation. And I knew that Los Angeles, or I had discovered that Los Angeles had a fairly large number of wheelchair accessible taxis. And so I was able to get to the hotel and to the game. But the football stadium, the Rose Bowl, is outside of the city of Los Angeles. And therefore it was very difficult for us to arrange transportation on the way back. We actually left the game, used the LA metro system to get us back into LA, and then we got a taxi from one of the metro stations. So I think ground transportation, and particularly for a wheelchair that can't just be folded up and thrown into the back of a taxi cab, is a challenge that a lot of disabled travelers, are worried about, being able to overcome.
Exactly. Yeah, you need a certain type of vehicle that has to accommodate you so that you can actually use the taxis. And you're right. That's the one thing. Ground transportation is something that is of concern in most places, actually. There's some that are better than others, but it is something that, it's a concern. The flying there, the getting there, that kind of stuff, and staying in the hotel, those are, you may have a few little glitches, but for the most part, those are fine. It's how to get from point A to point B. That can be a bit of a problem. So then after the first trip, after LA, you decided, you've flown, over 300,000 miles in your wheelchair, and you are, in our consideration, you're sort of a leading authority in accessible travel, which is fantastic. So what was the next step? What did you then decide to do? Were you working at the time that everything happened, or?
Well, at the time of my accident, I was a school teacher just out of grad school. I was part of the Teach for America organization where they send recent graduates, highly qualified applicants to poorer school districts in the United States. So inner city schools. I was placed in St. Louis, Missouri. So I had been teaching there before the accident. At the time of my first trip, I was only 6 weeks out from the surgeries that had taken my legs. So I was traveling in spite of some health issues and maybe against my doctor's best wishes.
Yeah, right.
But I had been out of the air for over a year, and I had to get back to traveling.
You know what? Good for you. You were relatively, I can see why your doctor, maybe you weren't completely healed when you decided to start traveling again. But what did you teach in school, John, when you were in Missouri? What were you teaching?
Well, I was teaching history to 10th graders. So I was on the world history track. I don't think that I would have, been willing to teach any other subject because both of my degrees at university had been in history, and I'm very passionate, about that topic.
Right. So did you still continue to teach after the accident?
No, I guess, the first trip and my leg amputations had occurred over a year after the actual accident. And so I was in and out of the hospital for the good part of 2013.
Yeah.
Accident happened end of 2012, and I got back into the sky and to traveling in January 2014.
Right. Okay. So did you decide that this was kind of going to be your mission, I guess, is to travel the world via power wheelchair and share the stories and maybe encourage other people to do the same?
Well, it took about a year for me to create the blog wheelchairtravel.org.
Right.
I had a personal blog at the time, and I was sharing a few details about some of the trips that I was taking. But I hadn't, really considered for about a year starting a blog that is focused on, sharing the experiences of travel and how to overcome barriers to accessibility. But as I looked around the internet, and I was still Google searching for information on accessibility for destinations that I was traveling to, and I was continually disappointed by the lack of information that was
Right.
available. So I found a need for it on the internet, and decided to do a service to my new disability community and share what I was learning, while traveling.
Right. Now, did you join any type of organizations, travel disabled organizations or travel organizations or anything like that after all of this happening? You decided to kind of get back in the saddle, per se, and get out there and get in the sky again.
Well, I will say this. I don't have membership in any particular travel groups necessarily, but I do have a lot of friends who travel and people that I have met over the years traveling, and so I do have a great base of support and friends all over the world who share my love of travel. And so, that certainly inspired me, to get back out there so that I could, start running into my friends in the airport again. That's always a fun experience, and one that I had missed for over a year.
That's fantastic. So after the trip to LA, did you start planning where you'd want to visit in the world that you hadn't been to yet? And what were your thoughts? What were your first, how did you first sit down and sort of plan your bucket list, per se, of where you were going to?
So for the first few months after the first trip, I was mostly going to places I had been before here in the United States. So I went out to Washington, D.C., the capital. I went up to Boston and back out to the West Coast for some things. But my first truly new destination was an international one. And it was, I considered the trip to be risky because the information, about the city that I was traveling to was very sparse, and it was a foreign country that I had never visited, and that country was China, and I was going to Beijing to see the Great Wall of China, which had always been near the top of my bucket list. And I have to say, it was a very challenging trip. There are some funny things that happened to me during that journey, but ultimately it worked out.
Love to hear. Share some stories.
Well, I think perhaps the most embarrassing story for me relates to my power wheelchair, and that it has a battery, and so there's a limited range, that the power charge will carry the chair. And so I had just had a wonderful day in Beijing. I think this was my second day there, and I'd gone out to the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square, and just had a wonderful time touring all of that. But
Right,
I
right.
was rolling quite a bit. The Forbidden City is at least a mile in length, and then you have to backtrack out of that attraction. And so I was on my way back to the hotel, and about 4 or 5 blocks from my hotel, my power wheelchair ran out of power, and so it
Oh,
was 9 or 10 o'clock at night. It was dark out. I was on a Beijing sidewalk, and I had no way to continue forward.
were you by yourself?
Thankfully, I was by myself, and thankfully, after 4 or 5 tries, I found someone who spoke English, and he was a nice man from Malaysia who was in Beijing for work, and he kindly pushed me the remaining 4 blocks to my hotel.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so I was saved by the goodness of another,
Right.
and it taught me a very important lesson in traveling, in that most people, if they can understand your language and what you're saying, are very good people, and will always, or almost always, be willing to lend a hand if you encounter an issue.
Yes, yes.
And so that was my embarrassing story from Beijing. I have written about it before, so it's not a secret I'm keeping hidden. But
Yeah,
still
it's one of those
embarrassing
things that
to
you have
bring
to
up.
plan.
Yes, absolutely. And now when I take a trip, I know the range of my chair. It varies a little bit based on terrain and things like that, but I'm able to plot out a fairly safe itinerary each day now when I travel, so that I won't run out of power again.
Yeah, exactly. So then that would have been a memorable trip. That's a beautiful place in the world, and I think that would be amazing. How long were you in China for?
Well, this is going to sound crazy, but I was concerned on that first trip to China with accessibility, and I thought that there was probably a very good chance that I would arrive at the airport and have no way to get to my hotel, and that I would end up having to turn back. So
Right,
I booked
right.
a trip. I think it was 56 hours that I was on the ground in Beijing. I did a great deal while I was there.
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
make it back last year, so I visited Beijing a few times now. But that first trip, I was concerned because it was my first trip abroad with the wheelchair and with my new disability, and I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't be caught up in a bad situation.
Exactly. And so, how did you find that you were about finding transportation when you arrived there?
Well, when I arrived there, I actually took the subway system to my hotel, and that was an experience in and of itself.
Right.
There are not elevators at every station in Beijing, but they do have these stair lifts. Unfortunately, my first time using the stair lift on my way to the hotel that night, the lift broke with me on it halfway up the stairwell.
Oh my gosh.
It was fixed within about 30 to 45 minutes, and so I was able to continue on. But I had been told that that stair lift had not been used since the 2008 Olympic Games, and so it makes a lot of sense why it broke down. But I was more frustrated by the fact that that it had not been used in 6 years, and so that that's very frustrating to me, because I think that everyone should be out there traveling, and have the right to travel and the ability to do so. I put those stair lifts, through their paces quite a bit more. But I'd like to see, more people traveling with their disabilities.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the only way, well, I shouldn't say the only way, but most people, they rely on information, and there isn't a lot. So what you're doing is such a valuable resource. It's absolutely huge, the resource that you are providing. And so after you visited China, tell us about the next thoughts, or what was next on the bucket list?
Oh my. Next on the bucket list, and really it was number 2 on my list until last year, was the Kremlin in Moscow, Russia.
Oh wow, and you had big dreams of visiting some great places.
Yes, I think my bucket list includes a lot of cities that are considered to be, some of the most inaccessible places in the world. And, I love to challenge myself in that way and try to figure things out, as best as I can. But, Moscow really surprised me, because I had read so much on the internet about, how the city was basically a no-go zone for people who use wheelchairs. And
really, and that's true.
When I arrived there, I actually discovered quite the opposite, in that I felt more comfortable getting around Moscow than I do New York City.
Yes.
And that was a true shock to me, and it made me realize that a lot of the information that is available online, is either inaccurate or outdated.
That's so true, John.
One of the articles that I found, actually, I believe appeared on the PBS website about accessibility issues in Moscow. It had been written, I believe, in 2011 or 2012, so a couple of years before my trip there. And the author was an able-bodied individual. Who made a judgment about the accessibility of the city based on all of the stairs down to the subway station.
Yes.
And, it is true that the metro subway system in Moscow is inaccessible, but nearly all of the city buses are. They have ramps for wheelchairs, and I use them quite effectively to get to all of the major sites in the city, and had a really good time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Moscow, I mean, there's some great accessible travel providers that I use that do amazing jobs. And you can go and you can actually visit fantastic places. And so I think the writer was not really looking at it from, well, because the person was able-bodied, I don't know if they were looking at it from the place of being, somebody with a disability. So I don't know, but that would have been a fantastic trip. And so now you've, of course, as I say, clocked 300,000 miles in your power wheelchair. So give us some ideas on what was the next spot.
Well, I've traveled a lot by air. I am more over 300,000 miles flown since that first trip in January of 2014.
Right.
And, I think, air travel is an area where, I've spent a great deal of attention on my website in terms of, telling travelers, the information that they really need to plan an accessible air travel experience. And,
yes.
A lot of the issues that I face relate to my power wheelchair, which I know that that, many travelers, are fine getting around, with their manual wheelchair. But, I'm traveling with only one hand, and so, the manual chair is just not an option for me.
No, that's not going to work for you.
I think, I think air travel, for the most part, can be a generally accessible experience. The major issues like damage to wheelchairs and perhaps personal injury in transferring to a seat or something. Those those worst case scenarios are very rare.
Yes.
There are general challenges, perhaps waiting for assistance on and off the plane. And those can be frustrating if you're on a schedule. But in general, I haven't had too many problems in traveling the world, with my wheelchair and with my disability. Whether I'm on carriers, based in the United States or, around the world. I've flown more than 15 different airlines to make up those 300,000 miles. So, I found a generally accessible experience in most places around the world.
Right. Now, so what really are you trying to achieve then with wheelchairtravel.org? What are you really, really wanting to achieve with it?
Well, I'm trying to, my primary goal is to help people open the world to themselves. And so they need to, be given, I think, a roadmap or, a guide to creating an accessible travel experience. Whether they do that, whether they plan the trip on their own like I do, or use, an accessible travel agent or consultant to help in planning that trip. I want to give people the tools to fulfill their bucket lists.
Right.
I've been very fortunate in having the opportunity to do, a lot of the things, that I've always wanted to do. But I feel very alone in airports or on trains. I'm oftentimes the only person in a wheelchair, who uses one full time for mobility.
Right.
I'm often the only person like that. I rarely see other folks like me, but I know that we exist as a community in vast numbers.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
I want to create a world or help to encourage the world to become more accessible so that, people like me can, get over their fears of going out into the world and, having these incredible experiences through travel.
Right, exactly. And what would you say is was your favorite destination, and which probably was the most accessible?
Well, I'll give you a domestic in the United States and an international one. And
Perfect.
domestically, I think that the most accessible city in the country, from the perspective of a tourist, not necessarily someone who wants to live there and, spend their lives, in a place. I think that Seattle, Washington, in the Pacific Northwest, is an incredibly accessible city. I've never waited more than 10 minutes for an accessible taxi cab. The public transportation system is 100% accessible. You can get on the boats to tour Puget Sound and all of the museums and attractions, even the Space Needle, are wheelchair accessible.
Yes.
And so domestically, I think that is really a perfect place, to visit for wheelchair users. Internationally, my favorite destination has been Hong Kong. It's not the most accessible city that I've been to outside of the country, but Hong Kong is just an incredible world city. It reminds me a great deal of New York City, and
Right.
many of the accessibility challenges that are present in New York City are just not there in not a problem in
In
in Hong
Japan.
Kong.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's a really incredible city. There's I don't know. There's so much to experience from a cultural standpoint as well, and I've done some pretty incredible things like riding a cable car up to this incredible Buddha statue outside the city. Hong Kong is one of my favorite destinations and one that I keep going back to.
Right.
It's a different experience every time, and accessibility for the most part is always fair. It's fairly easy to get around and see things.
Yeah, exactly. And they really are, I have to say, they do some amazing things as far as creating accessibility. And you're right, that when you compare it to some of the cities in North America, they, as I think, they kick our butt on a lot of things, actually. So it is a beautiful spot, and I don't blame you for loving that destination. And so what are your tips? So what would you say if somebody says, okay, you know what, I'm in a power wheelchair and I want to travel. What would you tell them to do besides phone me?
Well, I think the first major thing to figure out is where you want to go, and so understanding the accessibility of the destination, is an important first step. And I think that there are a lot of resources to do that. My website, has a lot of information about accessibility for the cities that I visited, and there are other bloggers out there who are writing about their experiences as well. I think a second tip would be in understanding specifically the challenges that you'll face in the travel ribbon, I guess I call it. From the booking of your journey to collecting your baggage at the destination and checking into a hotel. I really think that information is key, and so reading about the experiences of others and the challenges they face and how to overcome them, I think is just the most important thing for a traveler to do. I think something that helps me when I travel is understanding that I'm going to need to be patient, that things happen more slowly, that there will be hiccups along the way, and also understanding that for the most part, when an issue does arise, the people who are responsible for that issue did not do so intentionally, and that mistakes happen, and that a travel experience can still move on after a bad moment.
That's right.
And
yeah.
So I think the most important thing is information about your destination and what it's like to travel in a wheelchair, and maybe on that first trip, start small. Don't go to Beijing on your first trip. I had some experience traveling, in my wheelchair, but before I started taking those, journeys with higher risk or where, I was less sure. Washington, D.C., Seattle, those are great places to plan, a first wheelchair accessible vacation, because they're very accessible and, there will be fewer surprises.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been wonderful. Now, just so everyone knows how to actually find John, who is a wealth of information, his website is www.wheelchairtravel.org. That's wheelchairtravel.org. And he has a fantastic Facebook page as well, which is Wheelchair Travel. And you will find amazing things. And I urge you to also sign up for his email updates, because there's lots of great information that he shares with you as well. And if somebody wants to reach out to you as well, John, can they email you with some questions?
Yes, absolutely. I am answering questions from readers all the time, and my email address is John, John, at wheelchairtravel.org.
Fantastic.
Don't necessarily expect a response within 24 hours, but
Yeah.
I will get to it as soon as I can. I'm always so happy to be a part of travelers realizing their dreams, and so I'm so excited to help out in any way that I can.
Fantastic. Thank you so very, very much, John, for sharing your story and your wisdom with all of us. And once again, John Morris, and I urge all of you to visit wheelchairtravel.org or going to Facebook at Wheelchair Travel. I suggest that you do that. Great. Thank you so much, John, for joining us. And thank you, everyone who's tuned in to Travel for All. And start making some plans. Start out small and give us a call. We'd love to help you see the world with varied disabilities. It is still your oyster. Thank you so much for joining us all. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Travel for All Radio. We hope that we have inspired you to travel. And remember that travel is the only thing you buy that makes you richer.